very concerned about the Criminal Justice Terrorist Offences Amendment Bill that the government is introducing. You'll be aware of NECAP, a band being charged with terrorist offences in the UK. Palestine Action, another group. There's young people in jail, not even given bail as we speak. And this bill can make it an offence to glorify terrorism, a very vague phrase that can be used in so many ways. Like, we see that Palestine Action being criminalised. Members of Palestine Action have been involved in issues here. But it seems that the government is going to go along with the EU criminalising people who want to end terrorism, who want to end state terrorism against the Palestinian people. And we will absolutely oppose that. It's an outrageous, going along with the EU policy, which has been to turn a blind eye and support the genocide on Gaza. I think I just want to mention the issue of health that's come up this morning. Firstly, there is no way that you can move to implement a full working 7-day health system without providing the 1,000 beds that are estimated by the ESRI to be needed. And also by 2040, they estimate there will be a need for 5,000 to 8,000 beds. We don't know how many vacancies there is in the HSE, but we know there's a huge amount and that there's a real problem with staff recruitment and retention. So the government have to answer, is this just a virtue signal to look like they're actually dealing with the trolley crisis, when in actual fact we need staff who are well paid, who are rewarded, who are valued, and we need beds into the system as well. And just lastly, I want to mention it's Pride Month, and I have noticed that Pride isn't on the agenda of the Dáil this week. Normally there would be statements on Pride, and I'm wondering if it's part of the growing movement that we're seeing of corporations, backing out of supporting LGBTQI rights, and the far right and the reactionary movement against rights that have taken place. I will be questioning why that isn't on the Dáil agenda, and it should be on the Dáil agenda, because minorities are under attack, and we know that LGBT plus rights are under attack as well. You would have heard Panty Bliss talking about people can actually call you a paedophile on the streets now, which never would have happened a number of years ago. So we want to push back against that, I think.
I wrote to the Ceann Comhairle yesterday seeking that the Business Committee would agree to debate what's happening in the Middle East and Israel and the US's attacks on Iran. This is obviously an extremely dangerous development that has the potential for an all-out regional war in the Middle East, and even danger beyond that to the world as a whole. It is outrageous that Neil Martin has not condemned the US strikes against Iran. They are flagrantly a breach of international law. They're flagrantly a breach of any sense of basic morality. They're basically imperialist attacks, replaying the lines for those of us who were around of 2003 and the justification of the war on Iraq. All of a sudden, people are very concerned about human rights in the Middle East, very concerned about women's rights in the Middle East, very concerned about nuclear powers in the Middle East. And, we're being asked to accept that up is down whenever US bombs Iran, then Trump issues a statement saying we want to have peace, suggesting they need to come back to the negotiating table, when Iran was at the negotiating table when Israel began the assault on Iran. When Iran is not the nuclear power in the Middle East, Israel is the nuclear power in the Middle East, and Israel is not part of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, is backed to the hilt by the US. And so it's absolutely scandalous that we have a government that is so in hock to US imperialism that it cannot condemn this assault on Iran that is a danger to the whole world. It underlines for us the importance of neutrality. We need now to get US troops out of Shannon. Having US troops in Shannon, more than 3 million have passed through on the way to the Middle East over the past 20 years, makes Ireland a target, makes us less safe, not more safe. Also, Shannon Airport was used for US rendition flights. So, when the US is supporting Israel in its war in Iran, supporting the genocide in Gaza, and similarly being supported by the key figures in the European Union, it really underlines the significance of maintaining the triple lock and maintaining what we have left of our neutrality. Just briefly in terms of Gaza and the occupied territories, Bill, obviously the horror deepens day after day. For three and a half weeks now, you've had a tiny amount of aid allowed in, only under the auspices of the so-called Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, a joint Israeli-US operation. No one else allowed in, not the UN and others. And this being used as a weapon of war to pursue ethnic cleansing, to move people out of certain areas of Gaza, and then literally every single day now, tens of people, if not over 50 people a day, are being shot down by tanks while queuing for aid. You had the review of the EU-Israel Association Agreement, which found that Israel is not complying with its human rights obligations. Obviously, that's an understatement, if ever there was one. We've had almost 21 months now of genocide happening, and then the assault on Iran. But for us, this underlines the reason that we need to have, at the very least, the full implementation of the Occupied Territories Bill. The carving out of services is not acceptable. That's a majority of trade between Ireland and the occupied territories. That's the likes of Airbnb offering up stolen homes for rent in the occupied territories. There's no legal justification for this distinction between goods and services. The ICJ decision, which is what the government kind of hung its change of position last year on, makes no reference to the difference between goods and services. It simply says that there should be no trade with these occupied territories. So we need to have one detailed issue is that the Attorney General advice, they've gone to look for more Attorney General advice because the last Attorney General advice didn't make reference to a distinction between goods and services. This advice needs to be published in advance of the pre-legislative hearings. Otherwise, we're going to have pre-legislative hearings where we're going to have these vague references to legal issues, but without anyone being able to actively kind of challenge, well, what are the legal issues? This is the other legal advice, and to engage in a serious way with it. And the final point to echo Ruth's points around Thursday's bill, but also Wednesday's extension of the Special Criminal Court. This is odious in a democracy that we have non-jury courts. It's odious that you have levels of evidence, standards of evidence whereby effectively the word of the senior guard is accepted as fact in the Special Criminal Court. Every year we argue against it. Every year we vote against it. This year we have a Minister for Justice who's saying, well, don't worry, this will probably be the last time we vote like this, because they're going to take the majority recommendations of the report on board and put it on a permanent legislative footing. So in a sense, putting on a permanent legislative footing, in a sense that's like good practice, but they're putting on permanent legislative footing what is fundamentally undemocratic, what is an attack on basic rights, the right to a trial of a jury of your peers. And it's particularly important to oppose it and the legislation on Thursday in the context of what's happening with anti-terror legislation being used against just peaceful pro-Palestine protesters. Like it is, I was speaking at a meeting in London at the weekend. It is absolutely crazy that Palestine Action is going to be a prescribed terrorist organisation, which means you could not write an article saying, I'm not attacking any planes, I'm not doing anything like that, I'm not damaging any planes, but I support the aims of Palestine Action. That would be illegal to do that. That is a crazy incursion on civil liberties. The same has happened in France, the same has happened in Germany, and it's why we need to defend civil liberties and their right to free speech.
Paul, the Attorney General's advice that you want published, the implication had been in recent weeks that legal uncertainty had come from the Attorney General. That's not the case now. So where did the thoughts spring from, do you think, that they introduced that distinction?
I had a back and forth with Simon Harris, I think in oral PQs 2 weeks ago, if not 3 weeks ago, where it was clear there. He said, no, we don't have any Attorney General's advice. So from what I understand, it is advice that's coming from the Department of Foreign Affairs. And I don't believe that it is driven by legal considerations. I believe that it is driven by political consideration in terms of they're under pressure from below to do something, but they don't want to annoy Trump. And what they've come up with is, okay, we carve out the services because that'll keep US multinationals like Airbnb out of it. I think this is all political. Now they've gone back to the Attorney General to say we want some advice that deals with this, goods and services, but we obviously know, because it's been leaked, that the previous advice made no such distinction, and under EU law there is no such distinction. Yeah.
I think in that back and forth, Concha also said that it would be difficult to implement any rules around services and how, because it's easier to do it for goods. Do you accept that?
I mean, no. And again, this is like only being raised very laterally, that this is a problem. We can say that no trade, and you can say it under international law. In fact, there's a legal argument that you're compelled to say it under international law because of the International Court of Justice last year, that there shall be no trade between any entities based in Ireland and the illegally occupied territories. And then it's a criminal offence for Airbnb to advertise a house that's stolen from a Palestinian. Do you know what I mean? I don't really see the distinction or why it would be easier or whatever. It's a question of like making a political and legal decision.
Invitations seem to be issuing from the US Embassy for July 4th celebrations. Now, I'd be surprised if you guys were going to go along, but I'm wondering, did you get the invitations, and what would you say to TDs who are considering going?
I got an invitation, all right, yeah. Well, I'm part of the Dublin 15 with Palestine group, which covers the Phoenix Park as well, partially, or it's very near it. So we've organised a protest from our local group.
You'll be going, but you'll be outside.
We'll be going, but we'll be outside protesting, because what's happening in the world is just incredible. We've talked about it already, the bombing of Iran without any, completely unprovoked. And yet it's just taken as read that that's okay. So we will call on all TDs to boycott it, obviously, and all local groups to protest.